for the murder of Bachman. They used our tax dollars for those weapons. They used our tax dollars for those weapons. So I appreciate you all for giving me the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to really just say, we have the power. I truly believe in the slogan, all power to the people. I truly believe in that slogan, you know. So, peace and power. She wants me to speak to the Renee Hall's performance. I think that anytime you have an elected official or a person that's been appointed in a position in leadership and there's no transparency in the process on how they conduct their investigations, so on and so forth, that's criminal. I think it's criminal to the citizens. I think if you hide evidence or you try to hide the hand so that others don't know what you're doing, I think that's criminal. And I think from that standpoint, we should hold Chief Hall accountable. And not only Chief Hall accountable, I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to say those in all of her chiefs, from every subdivision across the city, if you're quiet about this issue as a leader in this community and you say nothing, then you're just as responsible as the chief is. You're just as responsible and just as guilty. So my position is I say it's guilt on the part of Renee Hall, it's guilt on the part of the DA Johnson, Faith Johnson, who's done the best to do the political dance so that she can try to get elected. We know who appointed you. We know that old Republican governor appointed you. And we're not caring about just because you got some black face and you know how to talk to us and talk real sweet and know how to relate to people in the southern sector of Dallas. Just because of that don't mean you're going to get nobody voting. So, guilty. Guilty, guilty, guilty.
Anybody else coming up for comment?
I'm going to leave this on the mic stand in case I have to refer to my notes. As the oldest person in the room, I might have to look at a piece of paper. But for that very reason, I want to approach you with some humility and nervousness that I can say something relevant to this group. The first police brutality case I worked on was in the 1970s, and it wasn't the 1973 killing of Santos Rodriguez, but it was the struggle to get get the feds involved in a civil rights violation. And sometime in 1977, I met his mom, and one of the first things I did as an activist was help her write a letter to President Carter seeking a federal involvement in that case. So I've been doing this a pretty long time. I've been doing it since I was your age. And I want to say that in a fatal police shooting, the second victim is always the truth. And that's the way it is in this case. All of the official pronouncements about what happened that night, all of the official versions of the events of that night, all of the so-called official facts add up to one big lie. And that is that Officer Geiger had any reason to be standing in the doorway of this good man's apartment, that she had any reason to push on his door, that she had any reason to peer into his apartment, that she had any reason at all to pull her weapon or bark orders at this good man sitting in his own apartment, and that certainly she had no reason to pull the trigger on her gun and kill him. And this preposterous injustice against both of them is now a moral injustice against everyone in this city. I mean, why does Amber Geiger still have a job with the city of Dallas? You know, Roy Oliver, even in Balch Springs, was fired 3 days after he killed Jordan Edwards. He was fired before he was charged with any crime, and he was fired a month or so before he was indicted of any crime. And we've seen even Chief Brown fire people before they were charged with a crime. So every day that she draws a paycheck from the Dallas Police Department is an insult, really, to the conscience and to the intelligence of the people in the city. As far as the investigation goes, there is no transparency.
It's opaque.
Zero. This is like ExxonMobil talking about how much they care about the environment. There's zero substance behind it. If there were even an iota of transparency in this investigation, we would have already seen the toxicology report on Amber Geiger. We would already know if she was drunk, stoned, or whatever, taking steroids, or whatever medicine she might have been taking. We'd already know it if there was any transparency. If there was any transparency in this investigation, this 9/11 shots fired call that she made would already have been released, you know? But instead we get selective leaking of evidence meant to tear down the reputation of the victim and meant to lift up the story of the suspect. And so you have a situation that is the opposite of transparency. And yet, the public officials most responsible for this investigation keep saying transparency, transparency, transparency. And I mean, not to mention the mayor, he walks around as if both of them came to Dallas and everything was really great, and then he died of some mysterious disease, and now we're just all gonna come together. You know, I mean, he's acting like this wasn't even a crime. So we have a situation that is really, in my mind, something like this. Once the system kicked in, the thing actually, once the Rangers came into it, and that's when the system kicked in. Because it is good for a police department not to investigate itself. But normally you want somebody from the Department of Justice or a special prosecutor, something like that. And even in the age of Trump, the federal government is still the main guarantor of human rights outside of just the power of the public to enforce them. So for constitutional rights, we still have to knock on that federal door. But to bring the Texas Rangers in, a sort of, they don't have this in other states. You know, the Texas Rangers is something out of, I don't know all the details, but it's something out of Reconstruction and slavery, you know. And they certainly botched the whole investigation of Sandra Bland. I mean, that's a death in custody. When you're in the custody of someone, that means you're in the care of them, right? You can't leave, so anything you need, they should bring to you. And we've had deaths in custody in Dallas. We've had over 125 people die in custody since 2005 at the hands of the city of Dallas. We've had our jail, our so-called award-winning jail, somebody dies over there every 6 weeks. You know, and that's over a period of 10 years, averaged out. In Fort Worth, it's half as much. You know, so people die in a jail because they get sick and die, but if you're in custody in a jail, you're also in the care of the jail. So this house of death over here on Riverfront is not really a humane jail. You know, it can pass, if you can pass inspection in Texas, I'm sure that means that you have running water, you know. Anyway, I'd like to say that for Chief Hall, she has some of the characteristics that Chief Brown had, which is easy access, always willing to meet, always willing. She'd come here probably today if she didn't think she'd be criticized too much. Access to the public, wants to be open. But whether there's any substance to it, you know, this case is a pretty good window on whether there is or will be. And so I think no public official and no appointed official can be beyond criticism. And you can't build a movement against police brutality if you're going to put the police chief on a pedestal. You've got to be able to address her honestly and critically, no matter who she or he might be. It's well known that a white power structure will often put a black person in a position that looks like authority, and then they're surrounded by what Cornel West calls structural constraints. You know, and so when you go to the bank, the loan officer that denies you might be white, but when you make a complaint, the community relations person will be black. So, I mean, this is a common tactic, you know. But the creative person in that role will turn it around on the power structure. And that's what I'm sure many people hoped and still hope that Chief Hall will do. Let me say, I want to address the issue of training because it comes up a lot. I don't know how you can train an officer to not go into someone else's apartment and kill them? What kind of training would that be? I don't know how you train an officer not to take a high-powered combat rifle and kill a 15-year-old through a car window while they're driving away from you. I don't know how you could train the 2 officers that killed Jason Harrison in 2014 not to go on someone's porch and a man holding a screwdriver